Good evening. Today we're learning Maseches Bava Daf Yomi. We're starting on the fourth line. We are continuing to analyze the world of tsuroros. Tsuroros is a halacha l'moshe misinai, that when an animal kicks up a rock and it then damages something, so that has a special din. It's a machlokes tanaim if it's chatzi nezek or if it's nezek shalem. But nevertheless, tsuroros is a halacha l'moshe misinai. So we're analyzing different iterations. Housekeeping note, tomorrow night we are not in person, but we are live on Zoom in Mirz Hashem if my flight is on time. If you don't hear from me, that's a good sign. That means that shiur is going to be on time. If things change, I'll let you know. The Gemara says on Yud Testament, all 4 lines down, by Rav Ashi, yesh shinui litzroros l'revia nezek, o ein shinui litzroros l'revia nezek. Is there such a thing as paying a quarter? We've spoken about nezek shalim, and we've spoken about chatzi nezek. But perhaps tsuroros, which is 1 degree removed from regular misbehaviors, maybe that should get a din of revia. So the Gemara says, maybe tifsha lemi de Rava. Perhaps we can answer this question from the world of Rava. Rava asked a question, and we saw this question in yesterday's daf. What was his question? Yesh ha'ada l'tsuroros o ein ha'ada l'tsuroros. So what we had asked there is it possible for there to be muad by the world of tsuroros? That's what we were discussing. And the Gemara says over here, Michlal, the Ein Shinui. Based on the fact that we're asking about Muad, it doesn't seem to be that we could lower the status from Chatzi Nezek. The only question is, can we raise it from Chatzi Nezek to Nezek Shalim? Not can we lower it from Chatzi Nezek to Revia? So says the Gemara, that's not a good answer. We're on Yud Testament Aleph 10 lines down. Dilma, perhaps Rava was only Imtim Salomar. Imtim Salomar Kamar, if you wanted to say that Imtim Salomar ain't Shinui, if you want to say that there really isn't a Shinui in punishment down to Revia, still Afal Pikim, we can still ask the question of Yesh Hado Ein Hado. But really there's no guaranteed way to infer from this brisa, it's not a brisa, from this question of Rava, one way or the other about the world of Tsuroros, and therefore the Gemara says Teku, we don't know the answer as to whether or not there's something called a Revia. Are there quarters in regards to tsuroros, yes or no? It's an interesting question because the Gemara doesn't present it anywhere other than in this question, but nevertheless, it's a question asked and left as a teku. Yud Testament Aleph 12 lines down, by Rav Ashi. We've already discussed this sugya elsewhere. Koach kocho l'sumchos kekocho dami olo. We know that sumchos holds that when it's kocho, the punishment is nezek shalim. What about koach kocho? What if I do a maisa and that through gram leads to another maisa? Do we say koach kocho is the same as kocho? Yes or no? The Gemara says, Mi gamir halacha umukila bekoach kocho. Do we take the halacha l'moshe misinai and extend it even to koach kocho? Namely, we know what tsuroros is. Tsuroros is when the animal steps on a rock in just the right way, it kicks off and it breaks my car window. So what if it breaks my car window and then my car window damages the seat inside the car? So how far do we take the koach kocho? Is it just the first thrust? Is that kocho? Is that where we would say, according to Sumchas, that the halacha l'moshe misinai applies? Or no, once we get removed 1 step too far, then it's no longer in the world of tsuroros. Or Delma, or perhaps lo gamer halacha klal. Perhaps we don't extend this to the world of the halacha l'moshe misinai at all. Says the Gemara Teku, we don't know the answer to that question either about the world of Sumchas. We had quoted in an earlier source in the Tanoim, quarter of the way down, if an animal was kicking, or as it steps, it's kicking rocks out, and and that rock that kicks out breaks something. This is a classical case of tsuroros. The Gemara says, let's analyze this. What is the actual case? Maybe here's possibility number 1. We'll soon see that this brisa, what we're going to try to figure out over the next many lines, is our brisa like the Rabbanon, that chatzi nezek tsuroros, that I should say that tsuroros is chatzi nezek, or no, is it like sumchus that it's nezek shalem? So do we say, first like the Rabbanon, that really the case is haisa miva'etes v'hizika bibi'uta, the animal kicked and it caused immediate damage, or tsuroros ki'orchai, it's either walking and causing damage, or there were tsuroros, then mishalim chatzi nezek v'rabbanon hi. O Dilma, or perhaps, no, we've misunderstood the brisa. And really the case is haisa miva'etes v'hizika bibi'uta, o tsuroros machmas biut. Either it's walking and as it kicks, it breaks pottery, or the animal forcefully kicks a rock and that rock then goes to break something, then mishalim chatzi nezek, and that would be haki orche, and therefore mishalim nezek shalim umani sumchasi. Do we say that our brisa about biut of kicking, is it like the Rabbanon and Chatzi Nezek, or is it like Sumchos and Nezek Shalim? So the Gemara says halfway down on your Testament Aleph, let's see if we can figure this out. We're going to be going today until the top of Chaf Amud Aleph, and that is how far we're going to get. So the Gemara tries to answer this question as follows: Tashma, just about halfway down end of the line, Darsa al hakli v'shavarta. An animal steps on a utensil and it breaks. V'nafal hashever al kli acher v'shavra. So if an animal steps and breaks kli number one, and then a shard from kli number one kicks out and breaks kli number two. So here we saw a distinction in punishments. Ala rishon mishalim nezek shalim, because that's ki urche. That's totally normal. An animal's walking, he doesn't look at what he steps on. He steps on a shard. He steps on a pottery, a jug made of pottery, and it breaks. On that, he's chayiv nezek shalim. V'ala achron chatzi nezek. On kli number two, which was broken by a shard from kli number one, there the din is that it's chatzi nezek. So says the Gemara, we're trying to figure out who the author of our brisa is. No problem. This is pasha. If you're going to say in the brisa that there's a din of chatzi nezek, now we know it's not sumchus. Sumchus is a one-trick pony. Sroros is nezek shalim. So therefore, this brisa can't be sumchus. It must be that the brisa is the rabbanon. The Gemara says, well, v'chitema rishon lahataza. Maybe when our brisa says that the punishment of rishon is nezek shalim, what I said was on kli number one is not really correct. It's the damage that was caused by kli number one to kli number two, and the sheni lahataza, and the second has to do with a further damage down the line. V'shayni leila sumchos bein kocho lekoach kocho, and maybe sumchos makes a distinction, and he says kocho is where he would say that Sororos is nezek shalim, but koach kocho he might say no, he might say that that's chatzi nezek. So there's a way to manipulate, and it is a manipulation to manipulate this brisa. To say like sumchus. So says the Gemara, if that's true, as we argued yesterday, and when we saw this line of the Gemara, Elaha debai Ravashi, that's a problem, because then we would have had an answer to Ravashi's question. What did Ravashi ask? Koach kocho lesumchus ke kocho dami, o lav ke kocho dami. So we should have said tifshol leide lav ke kocho dami. We should have said, based on our brisa, if our understanding of the Mishnah that we learned at the two dots, a third of the way down, if that Mishnah that we learned is like sumchus, and the only way to manipulate and learn that Mishnah like sumchus is to say that kocho is different than koach kocho, so then Ravashi should have said we have a raya brura over here on the top of Daf Yomi Testament Aleph, but he did not. So therefore, it cannot be that this brisa is like the shita of sumchus. And we are about 2/3 of the way down, 3 lines before the wide lines. And the Gemara says, you're right, really, Ravashi kirabanan mukila. Ravashi explains this Mishnah within the world of the Rabbanan. Uboy lahachi. Really, here is the question that Ravashi was talking about. Says the Gemara as follows. Let's say that an animal is kicking while it's walking and causing damage. Or it's kicking up a rock and inadvertently breaks something, but that's considered or chayu, that's considered normal and routine for an animal. In such a case, chatzi nezek. So says the Gemara, if that's true, hamachmas biut revia nezek v'yeshinui, would we then say, and this was Ravashi at the top of the page, we're blending these two sugyas together, would we then say that the kicking, the secondary kicking would be a revia, v'yeshinui, and it's considered abnormal, it's not or chayu? O dilma, no, that really, ha'isa miva'etes v'hizika b'bi'uta otzroros machmas biut chati nezek v'ein shinui, teku. Even if you want to say that we have a way to learn this according to the Rabbanon, that the second case is chatzi nezek, maybe we should say it's like revia. Maybe we should say it's even lower. Teku, we still don't know. We've doubled down on that question, on that answer, I should say, that we don't know about this idea of revia. So far in the first 18, 19 blot of the Gemara, this idea hasn't been found a single time, discussed twice in one page and rejected. And as well, the author of the Brisa, 1/3 of the way down, which is Haisa Miva'etes, is the Rabbanon. Another question. Second of the wide lines at the 2 dots. So Rav Abba Bar Mamel was the one who asked the question. We just don't know who he asked it to. Let's say your animal is walking in a place where it's filled with rocks. Definitely he's going to be kicking up rocks. Nothing to talk about. It's not 2, 3, 4 rocks. He's walking in a field of rocks. And then, even though it would have automatically kicked up rocks, risking breaking things, even though that's true, then uvata v'hitiza v'hizika mahu. But then it forcefully kicked a rock in an abnormal kind of way. How would we view that? Do we say kevan de'i efshar la, since no matter what, he's walking through a field of rocks, damage is going to happen one way or the other, then it's still orchehu, even though the cow kicked a little more forcefully. Or perhaps now, even though you're walking through a field of rocks, but when the cow kicks in an abnormal way and then that rock goes to break something, maybe it's not normal. Maybe he is going to be chayiv nezek shalom and it's not going to be tzroros. Here too, the Gemara says, teku. This case is a little strange. The animal specifically kicked a rock. You're right. No matter every step he takes, he's going to kick up tzroros. That's true. But when you kick, it kicks harder and it kicks further. Nevertheless, the Gemara calls that a teku. 3/4 of the way down, first words on the line after the 2 dots. Ba'a minei Rabbi Yirmiyah mi Rabbi Zera. Rabbi Yirmiyah asks a kasha to Rabbi Zera. An animal is walking in a public domain. V'hitiza v'hizika mahu. And a rock kicks up and causes damage. What's the din? 2 possibilities. Is it lekeren midaminon le v'chayebes? Do we treat this like a case of keren, and therefore he's going to be chayev, like he would be in any other case of keren, chatzin nezek? The animal we assume at this point is a tam. O dilma tolda de regel hu ptura. Is it the av, in which case he's chayev chatzin nezek, or is it the tolda, in which case he's pater, because the tolda of regel in rishus harabim is pater? So the Gemara says, Amar le mistabra tolda de regel. It seems to me, says the Gemara, it seems to me that it's a tolda of regel, and therefore you're going to be pater b'rishus harabim. Hitiza b'rishus harabim v'hizika b'rishus hayachid mahu. Let's say that you are your animal's walking outside. He steps on a rock in a public domain, and just like a golf ball on a golf course, the ball goes off the public fair and it hits someone's window and breaks it. So what would be the din there, mahu? Because on the one hand, if you say that an animal that does tzroros in rishus harabim is pater, but had he been in the rishus hanizak, he would have been chayev. So what happens if you're standing in a place where you would have been pater, but the rock traveled to a place where you'd be chayev? How do we fit those 2 things together? So Amar le akira ein kan hanocha yeshkan. If it would have landed over here in rishus harabim, you would have been pater. So how can you be chayev in another rishus? The animal standing in a rishus that bats him is pater for him. So we shouldn't assume anything different. We'll soon see that we're going to reject this. So says the Gemara, Eisvei, wait 1 second. How can you say such an idea? That just because the animal is standing in rishus harabim, where typically things are pater, that therefore, if the rock travels into a private domain, he would still be pater. After all, Eisvei, the Gemara says, if an animal is walking and kicks up a rock, Bein b'rshus hayachid, bein b'rshus harabim chayiv. The halacha is that wherever the animal is, if he's in rishus hayachid and he kicks up a rock, he's going to be accountable. And if he's in rishus harabim, he's also going to be accountable. My love, isn't it the case that he teases b'rshus harabim v'hizika b'rshus harabim? Isn't our understanding over here that he would even be chayiv in rishus harabim? Says the Gemara, lo, that is not our understanding of that brisa. Our understanding of the brisa is even worse. 7, 8 lines from the bottom. Hitiza b'rshus harabim v'hizika b'rshus hayachid. That's our case where we see that you're chayiv. We've reinterpreted the brisa that if a cow is standing in a public domain and steps on the ground and hits a rock in such a way where it goes into rishus hayachid and breaks your window, the halacha is that you're chayiv. You said a moment ago that if a cow does this, if he's standing in rishus harabim and kicks up a rock into rishus hayachid, you're pater. Says the Gemara, what about this brisa, which implies not like that? Says the Gemara, Amarle Hadri bi, I changed my shita. We're going to see this flow a few times, this shak b'vatari a few times right now, trying to prove that this initial response is not correct. What we're going to see is like we just saw here, that when an animal is in rishus harabim and it kicks up a rock and the rock travels into rishus hayachid and breaks a window, creates that nice little spider crack, the din is that you're going to be held accountable for such a thing. It says the Gemara Eisvei, I'll bring you another brisa that shows a similar thing. Darsa al hakli. Let's say that a cow steps on a utensil, ushvarto, and breaks it. And he breaks one of the pieces from kli number one breaks and then goes to break kli number two. So as we said above, the Tanya Allah, what did we learn about that brisa? When is that true? Bershus hanizak. Aval bershus harabim. That's only true in Rishus hanizak. But if this happens in Rishus harabim, where my cow steps on kli number one and it breaks kli number two, there ala rishon p'tur v'ala achron chayeves. On the first one, he's going to be patur because it's orche. He's just walking, no big deal. He's in Rishus harabim. Then on the second one, he's going to be chayev because it's sroros. So the Gemara says, "My love, isn't it the case that this brisa says he tiza b'rshus harabim, v'hizika b'rshus harabim, that all the damage happened in the same rishus?" Says the Gemara 2 lines from the bottom. Lo, no, that's not correct. Rather, he tiza b'rshus harabim v'hizika b'rshus hayachid. Amres akira ein kan anocha yeshkan. You wanted to say that perhaps in a case where that cow does the stepping in Rishus Harabim, and that rock then, as a projectile, leaves Rishus Harabim and goes into Rishus Hayachid, that they're chayiv. How can you say that? You said earlier, you're pater, Amar le hadribi. You're right. I already told you. I changed my shita. Says the Gemara, Eini, is this really true that you changed your shita? Turning to the top of your Testament base, one more amud to go. Says the Gemara, Amar Rabbi Yochanan. Rabbi Yochanan teaches us a din a little bit later in the Masechta on Daf Chavav. He teaches us ein chatzi nezek chaluk lo l'reshus hayachid lo l'reshus harabim, that there's no difference in chatzi nezek between the worlds of reshus hayachid and the worlds of reshus harabim. My love, he tiza b'reshus harabim v'izika b'reshus harabim. Aren't you even talking about, or aren't you only talking about, I should say, when you are only within one reshus, all reshus harabim? That's when we would say that there's no difference in chatzi nezek. Says the Gemara, lo, that's not correct. Rather, he tiza b'reshus harabim v'izika b'reshus hayachid. The case must be that this statement of Rabbi Yochanan, where there's no difference between Chatzi Nezek and Rishus Hayachid and Rishus Harabim, the Gemara says that that's only true. That's talking even in a case of Rishus Harabim where the damage began in Rishus Harabim and as a projectile it landed in Rishus Hayachid. So says the Gemara again for the third time, but we already saw that you held differently in this regard. We already saw Akira Ein Kan Hanocha Yeshkan, that you can't say that a cow that's in Rishus Harabim that should be pater because it's Keren. You can't say that if the projectile would then go into Rishus Hayachid that you're chayiv. Amarle, yes, I can. Hadri bi, I changed my shita. Ibai Sema, another possible way to understand Rabbi Yochanan's comment at the top of the page where he said that Chatzi Nezek doesn't distinguish between Rishus Hayachid and Rishus Harabim is that Ibai Sema Ki Amar Rabbi Yochanan a Keren. That's only talking about a regular case of Keren, but not a case of tziroros. So a lot of subtlety. Learning Maseches Bava Kama is like it's trudging through snow. It's every line. It requires work. It's a hard Masechta in that regard. No one concept so far is impossible to understand. It's not inherently so difficult, but every step requires thinking. We'll get a little bit of a break later. But in general, every step of Bava Kama, it's a little bit of a harder Masechta in that regard. But nevertheless, we have to be able to figure it out. We have to learn the Masechta to understand it properly. Al Buria. So the Gemara says 6 lines down, Yasi Rabbi Yehuda Nasiya. Rabbi Yehuda Nasiya was the grandson of Rabbi, not Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi. Rabbi Yehuda Nasiya of Rabbi Oshaya. They were standing Akila de Rabbi Yehuda. They were standing on the porch of Rabbi Yehuda. Nafak Milsa Bibenayu. They were talking and learning. Kishkesha Bizanva Mahu. Let's say that you have a horse, an animal that has a tail, and the animal is wagging its tail, and the wagging of the tail causes damage. Amar le'idach, the other guy said, what? You're going to walk around with chiyoch zena bizanva v'yelech? You think that it's a normal shmira to walk around and hold on to the tail of the horse so that it doesn't? That's ridiculous. No, it's normal behavior. Says the Gemara, Yachi Keren Nami, the same should be true in regards to Keren. We should say, Nema v'chiyoch zena b'keren v'yelech. Maybe we should say that with the animal's horns, you should walk around and hold the animal's horns. So why do you distinguish and say that we don't have to hold on to the horn? Why would you even ask the question in the first place? You think our obligation is to hold the horn of an animal so that he never gores? That's ridiculous. Says the Gemara, that's not even close to true. Karen lav urche. It's not normal for an animal to gore. However, urche. But the moving of the tail of an animal, every cow, I don't know if cows have tails. Every animal that has tails move their tails every day, thousands of times a day. But we don't assume that an animal is going to gore. So I'm allowed to ask, There is a distinction between the two cases. That's why what the Gemara says. So the Gemara says, but if what you're saying is that it's normal, if you're saying that this behavior is so normal, not only do we not have to hold on to the keren of an animal because it's abnormal, certainly we don't have to hold on to the tail of an animal when it's even more normal. So then what were you asking about in the first place about the tail? So he qualifies. He says, you're right, I wasn't so clear about my question. What I was asking about was kishkush yisera mibayale. What if the animal is shaking its tail more than normal and therefore it causes damage? Would we say that that's orche, or would we say that that's not orche? The Gemara then changes its question, asking about a different body part, about the reproductive organs of an animal. Let's say that the Aver Tashmish was moving about and potentially was breaking something. Keren lav yitzra katakifla. Just like it's true that when an animal gores with a keren, it has a desire to gore with the keren. It knows what it's doing with the keren. So too, perhaps we should say hachanami loshna. We should say the same thing with the reproductive organ, that if it's the animal knows what it's doing. It doesn't have a knowledge of the space of the Aver Atashmish. Dilma, no, it's just keren kavanasa lahazik. Only when it comes to a keren, when it comes to a horn, that's a tool used for damage. But the Aver Tashmish by an animal ain't kavanasa lahazik. That is definitely not the way that an animal would damage something. So says the Gemara, we don't know the answer to that. The halacha is not clear on that case. We're a third of the way down on New Testament base, continuing and trying to understand more iterations of the case of tsuroros. Says the Gemara, Hatarnagolin muadin lahalech kedarkan u'leshaber. We had said that an animal, a bird, is muad to walk around and break things. And then we spoke about a case where there was a string that got stuck on its leg, and the string then caused other things to break. So in regards to that string, which was referred to as the dalil, the Gemara says, Amar Rav Huna lo shanu. That's only if the animal got tangled up in this rope on its own. But if a man intentionally tied something to the leg of the chicken so that things could break, then of course the owner is going to be chayiv. So says the Gemara, nikshar me'elav. If the animal got all tangled up in something all by himself, who are you saying is going to be chayiv? There's two options. There's either the owner of that which is attached to the bird or the owner of the bird. Ilema, halfway down, Ilema Bal Hadalil. If you want to say that the person who's going to be chayiv is the person who owns the string and item that's attached to the chicken, so then Heichidami, what's the case? Ida Atzniye, if really the owner of the rope that's attached to his leg had really hidden this rope and the chicken somehow managed to get into the barn and got stuck in it, Anusu, that's not his fault. He put it away in a responsible way. And be'ilo atzne, if you want to say that it wasn't put away properly, then posheahu. Then the din is that if the person's a poshea, and therefore, of course, he's going to be held accountable. So that can't be it, because both of those are obvious. Ella says the Gemara, perhaps we'd want to say chayeb bal tarnagol. Perhaps we'd want to say that the person who's going to be held accountable is the chicken. Says the Gemara, Maishna, why is it over here in regards to the chicken, where we said that he's going to be chayev chatzi nezek? We would say Maishna kule nezek tilo. We're not even charging this guy nezek shalem for what he did. V'chsiv ki yiftach ish bor v'lo shor bor. That when we talk about a bor, we don't apply it to a bor that has come about because of another animal. So this chicken is walking around with a rope attached to it, tripping people. That doesn't count. So chatzi nezek nami, the same din should be true by chatzi nezek, ish bor v'lo shor bor. So you shouldn't be chayiv anything at all. So the Gemara says you're absolutely right. It doesn't make sense to say that this is the case, that this is the case of the dalil. Rather, Ella, 2/3 of the way down, almost 2/3 of the way down, Ella mas nisin b'da'adye aduye. The bird managed to throw something with its wing or kick something in a unique way where it appeared like it was thrown. That is the case that we are dealing with, and that is where our Mishnah has the qualification of Rav Huna. And says the Gemara, "V'chi itmar de Rav Huna be'alma itmar." Actually, it was said about something else. And here's what it was said about Dalil Hefker. If you have a rope or you have something that's just kind of hanging about in the field, and it's Hefker, and then the Gemara says, Amar Rav Huna, Nikshar Me'elav, if it got connected to the bird's foot by itself, Pater, Kishra Adam Chayiv, if a person tied it to him intentionally, then Chayiv. Mishum Mai Chayiv, what is he Chayiv for? Amar Rav Huna, Bar Manoach, Mishum Boro HaMisgalgel Beragle Adamu Beragle Behem. Is going to be held accountable for boro hamiskalgel. We saw this idea before about a boar that moves. This is basically a dangerous item, or an item that can be dangerous, that moves about. So if you intentionally tie it to a chicken, knowing that the chicken's going to walk around and cause people to trip, you're going to be held accountable for that. Last of the short lines, starting with a new Mishnah. This part's the easier part for the day. Says the Gemara, Ketzad Hashein Muedes. What's a case of an animal that with its teeth can cause damage? Says the Gemara, the case of Shein Muedes is Lechol Es Hara'ila. That's when it's normal to eat a food that's normal to eat. You have an orchard of oranges. You have a camel. Camel walks over to the tree, takes a bite of an orange. 100% normal, totally normal behavior. An animal is considered muad from the time he's born. You put him near fruit and vegetables, he's going to eat them. What if the animal was achla ksuso kelim? He ate clothing or he ate a kli, some type of utensil. The halacha is mishalem chatzi nezek. When would this be the case? Birshus hanizak aval birshus harabim pater. When do we say that if an animal eats something abnormal that you're chayav chatzi nezek, that's only birshus hanizak, but birshus harabim you'd be pater? Then the Gemara says, "V'im nehenes." If there's hana mishalemes masha nehenes, we're not going to learn what this means today, but seemingly based on hana, one would have to pay. Ketzad mishalemes masha nehenes. What then would be the din where he's mishalemes masha nehenes? Says the Gemara, if he ate something that was in the middle of the road, then okay, mishalemes masha nehenes. But mitzide harachava, if he eats it from the side of the road, so then that's a little bit different. So then Mishalemes Masha Izika, he only pays for exactly what he should be paying for, and not Masha Nenes, the amount that he enjoyed it. Miftach Hachanus. If an animal does damage at the opening of a store, Mishalemes Masha Nenes, it pays what it enjoyed. Mitoch Hachanus, if it caused damages inside a store, Mishalemes Masha Izika. Again, we don't know what this means yet. We're going to have to learn the Gemara. The Mishnah is a little enigmatic, and we'll get there. Let's start with the open of the Gemara, 15 lines or so from the bottom on Yud Testament days, heading to the top of Chaf Amud Aleph, where we're going to stop for the night. The Gemara says, "Tan Rabbanan Hashem Muedes Lechol Es Haroi." We know that an animal that causes damage by eating, that the din is that he's considered muad to eat that which it's normal to eat. Again, the example of a camel in an orchard. Put food in front of him, he's going to eat it. Excuse me. Ketzad, what's the case? An animal walks in to the field of the one who is being damaged, and he eats fruit off of the tree. And he drinks liquids that are normal for him. He's drinking out of a pond. The halacha is Mashalim Nezik Shalem. He's in the Rishus Hanizak. Pashad, he's Muad, and it shouldn't have been done this way. So you're Chayav Nezik Shalem. V'chein, says the Mishnah, says the Brisa, Chaya shenichnas al chatzer hanizak. If you have a wild animal that goes into the property of the nizak, v'tarfa behema v'achla basar, and it destroys an animal and eats it, the halacha is Mashalem Nezik Shalem. That you're obligated to pay nezek shalim in such a case. Upara she'achla se'orin, if you have a cow that eats se'orin, barley, v'chamor she'achal karshinin, you have a donkey that eats karshinin, v'kelev she'likek es hashemen, you have a dog that is lapping up oil, v'chazer she'achal shechaticha shel basar. These last two things are uncommon, says the Gemara. It's achila al yadei hadchak, as we'll soon see. That's very valuable to know. The halacha is mishalman nezik shalem. And Amar Rav Papa, hashta da amris kol midi de lavorche v'achla yadei hadchak shmei achila. Now that we know that when an animal eats something only al yadei hadchak, that it's still shmei achila. So then, what should then be the case? Then hay shunra the achal tamre, a cat who eats a date, which it doesn't normally do. The chamra, a mule the achal binisa that eats fish, which it also doesn't normally do. Then the chora mishalem nezek shalim, because what the Gemara had shown us is that when an animal eats something that it doesn't typically eat, you're still chayav nezek shalim. What does that show you? Achila al yedei hadchak is shma achila. How do we know? Because they're chayav nezek shalim, and the only time you're chayav nezek shalim by shein is when it's ro'ila. So if any food that the animal is willing to eat is now considered ro'ila, even if it's not his favorite food, even if it's only achila al yedei hadchak. The Gemara tells a little bit of a halachic story. 5 lines from the bottom. Hahu chamra, there was a donkey. Da'achal nama upalse l'sala. He ate bread and he ate the bread basket. Hungry little guy. Says the Gemara, Chayve Rabbi Yehuda l'shalem nezek shalem anahama. He says that he's obligated, Rabbi Yehuda says, that the owner of this mule is obligated to pay nezek shalem on the nahama, on the bread, ve'asala, but on the basket, chatzi nezek. He's only obligated to pay chatzi nezek. Why? On the basket. Why? Ve'amai. Kevan de orche lemechal nahama, because since it's normal for the animal to eat nama, to eat bread, orche nami lifluse sala. We should have thought that it's also his way to eat the basket. Says the Gemara, the achal v'hadar palis. We're talking about a case where first the animal ate the bread, which is normal, and then afterwards the animal ate the basket, which is not normal. If the way that the animal ate the bread was by eating the basket with the bread inside, that's considered to all be one. But when they're eaten separately, then the onshin are different. When they're eaten separately, bread first, basket later, you're chayiv nezek shalim on the bread, you're chayiv chatzi nezek on the basket. Says the Gemara, upas urchehu, is bread a normal thing for a chamor to eat? Or minhu, we have a brisa, 3 lines from the bottom. Achla pas ubasar v'tavshil mishalim chatzi nezek. My lab behema. If you have an animal that eats bread and that eats meat and that eats cooked meat, then it's mishalim chatzi nezek. Chatzi nezek. That's not mu'ad of shein. If it's mu'ad of shein, it's nezek shalim, like our Mishnah said at the top of the Mishnah. Ketzad shein mu'edes, eating ro'ila, shows you that bread is not ro'ila. Says the Gemara, my lab behema, aren't we talking about an animal? Says the Gemara, no, we're talking about bechaya. Says the Gemara, achaya, wait 1 second. Achaya is basar urchehu. How can you say that achaya doesn't have a derech to eat meat? Go look in the jungle. Chayas eat meat all the time. Says the Gemara, yes, they do, but they don't grill them first. Says the Gemara, Dematvi, we're talking about an animal that's grilled. It's abnormal for an animal in the jungle to eat cooked meat. It's abnormal for us to eat uncooked meat. So that would be a huge distinction. It's a fascinating thing. What we consider a delicacy of cooked meat is something that an animal in the jungle would never eat. They're not interested. They're not used to it. That's not what they eat. It's probably gross to them, I would imagine. Don't know. I've never tried it. That's what the Gemara says. Perhaps we're talking about a deer, where in fact a deer has a different association to bread as well. Rashi says at the bottom, middle of the line, Betavia, tzvi ein darko bepasu basar. I guess they're herbivores. I don't know. Do they not eat any meat at all? I have no idea. It seems from the Gemara that deer don't eat meat. The Gemara continues, really, we are talking about a behema, but uvipisora. But the food is, as Rashi says, uvipisora she'al hashulchan, achlo she'ein darko bekach. They're not so civilized. They're not coming to the table and eating food off the table. I think those who have dogs might argue that that's not true. Dogs come to the table all the time to eat food. Nevertheless, the Gemara assumes this to be an answer. One last short story for tonight, and then we'll stop. Again, a halachic story. Top of Chaf Amud Aleph, top word, top line. Ahu barcha. There was a goat. Rashi says a barcha is an aiz. The chazalifta that saw some type of vegetable, a turnip, a puma dedana, and he saw this on top of a barrel, at the mouth of a barrel, not knowing his own weight. Sarich salik, he jumped up and went over there to eat the turnip. And achla lelifta, as he was eating the turnip, vitabre ladana, and he broke the barrel. So now 2 things were damaged by this animal. Damage number 1 was the food, the turnip. Damage number 2 was the barrel. So what's the din? Chayve Rava alifta ve'adana nezek shalim. He said both of them are going to be chayv nezek shalim. Ask the Gemara, my taima. Says the Gemara, kevan de orche lemecha lifta, since it's normal for the animal to eat turnip, and it just happens to be that the turnip is on top of the barrel, it's also normal for him to jump up on top of the barrel and to eat it over there. So therefore, those two actions are in one fell swoop. If you leave a turnip on top of the barrel and an animal jumps up on top of the barrel to eat the turnip and the barrel breaks, that's all one thing, and they're all going to be chayiv nezek shalem because that is orchehu. We're going to stop right here, 5 lines down on Chaf Bar Aleph. We'll pick up Emir Hashem tomorrow night live on Zoom at 8:45, but not in person. Wishing you all a beautiful night.